Hey, it's your boy Skelegun again. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about the 1980 horror film directed by Bruno Mattei known as Hell of the Living Dead, or as it is called in Italian, Virus, El Inferno di Morte Viventi. This film is set in Papua New Guinea and is about a zombie plague. Now, what I want to mention before I get into this movie is that this is an Italian horror movie. From what I understand, the soundtrack is by Goblin. Now, some of you avid listeners who may have listened to my review of Contamination know I'm a big fan of Goblin, so I'm excited to hear their soundtrack to this. And according to Wikipedia, this movie is meant to be a more sort of, still gory, but it was meant to be more of a light in tone kind of horror movie compared to Dawn of the Dead, which I'm looking forward to. Also, I just noticed in the sort of critical reception section, which I like to check out, especially with Italian movies, it's always a good idea with an Italian horror movie to always do a little bit of digging before you watch them. I say that, and I specify Italian movies in particular, because Italian horror movies, for those of you who don't know, have a tendency to feature really bad stuff in them. In particular, what I'm talking about is there was a tendency during the 70s and 80s for Italian horror movies to be set in like jungles and stuff, and they would usually feature some footage, usually of actual real-life animals being killed, sometimes really graphically and in very inhumane manners. Now, sometimes this would take the form of them filming actual natives, killing an animal that the natives would intend to eat. Other times it was just like, hey, there's no, laws preventing this, I guess, at this time in this country, so why don't we just, chop up pay a local to chop up a monkey while it's, still alive, and we'll film it. That's the stuff you want to avoid with Italian horror movies, and it's why I'm always very picky when I watch an Italian horror movie, because I try to avoid that scene. I'm not a big fan of the Mondo horror movies, as they are sometimes referred to. So anyways, I did some checking. This movie apparently doesn't have any of that in it, so that gave me kind of the green light to go ahead and watch it. And I do just want to mention that I know I've talked about this before, but I did used to be a I was an apprentice funeral director for a year. I have cut up people, I've embalmed them, done all that stuff. People don't bother me. Things involving animals and children bother me. Those are my two bugaboos. Not a big fan of that, so even when it's simulated stuff, it still kind of bugs me. But when I know it's actual real life footage, that is just, nope, not doing it. Sorry, pal, not gonna watch it. Don't need that. So anyways, that kind of gives me the go-ahead to watch this movie, my own mental go-ahead. So as I was reading the notes about the movie on Wikipedia, carefully avoiding the plot summary so I could go into this a blank slate, I found this part pretty interesting. Mattei later expressed that he felt the film's dialogue was pretty stupid, and that all his films, he would reshoot if possible. So even the director, who's not known for making very high quality movies, acknowledges that this movie is pretty cheesy. And I'm going to be walking into this movie pretty blind. I do remember, this is a movie I kind of have vague secondhand recollections of, because I may have mentioned it before. I used to be really big into the horror movie, B-movie review websites back when I was a kid. And there was a lot of movies that, at the time, were just completely unavailable to me. It was this was that weird moment in time where all the local video stores that would possibly have these movies, they're just kind of like the mom and pop shops, those had all gone under. Blockbuster was the only name in town, really, unless you had a Hollywood Video. But this is also during that Twilight year where those kind of establishments would disappear. And it would be a long time before you would have services like Amazon Prime, which is providing this movie, which would come along and kind of bring availability to a lot of these hard-to-find movies. Because otherwise, you would basically, especially before the rise of Amazon as like a shipping thing, and I don't want to sound like I'm being overly positive to Amazon, because I think a lot of what they do is pretty terrible from a perspective of how they treat their employees and everything. But before, like, you had websites like Amazon, getting hard to find movies was nearly impossible. Like, typically DVDs would go on sale. They'd have like short runs, and unless it was like a major motion picture, it might only be available for a couple months, and then you're stuck with going on eBay and paying whatever somebody was asking for like a DVD copy, or for the VHS, which may or may not be jumpy when you get it. So I was obsessed with these kind of movies, and like Godzilla and kaiju movies, all those kind of movies. So I used to read these websites all the time. Most of these websites aren't even around anymore, unfortunately, and the few that aren't in very good shape. But that was kind of a big part of my life. So I do remember the title for this movie. I'm sure I've read the multiple reviews for this movie when I was like 12, but I don't remember any of them. So I'm going into this pretty much a blank slate. What I do know about it is that it's a horror movie about zombies. It came out shortly after Dawn of the Dead, and it's gonna be set in a jungle. So yeah, what I'm expecting is there's gonna be bad dialogue, as we've established. I'm expecting the plot is going to be just kind of like there's an outbreak in New York or something, and because that's how all these movies always begin, and they trace it back to like some jungle somewhere. A bunch of soldiers go into the jungle. The mission gets booched because everyone's super incompetent, as is always the case in Italian horror movies, and they manage to like barely scrape by, and at the end they blow up the facility or something. But guess what? The virus is still leaked out. Oh no. That's what I'm expecting from this film. So I'll be sipping on my Celestial Seasonings Fireside Vanilla Spice Tea, and I will give this film a watch, and I'll let you suckers know what I think about it after the break. Hello, welcome back. So I mentioned earlier that apparently this movie was considered to be, or at least was intended to be, a sort of lighter in tone version of Dawn of the Dead, which is to say, ripoff. I don't understand that intention, or if maybe that was the original intention, but they didn't follow through with it, because while it certainly is very much a kind of Dawn of the Dead-ish ripoff, it's not much lighter in tone than Dawn of the Dead. In fact, I think it's maybe even darker than Dawn of the Dead. So before I get into that, though, I'll do my little summary here. So the film begins with this company called, like, I think it's like the Hope Foundation, or Hope something like that. Anyways, they're doing some kind of they have some kind of laboratory out in like Papua New Guinea, I guess, and they're testing something. And then like one of the scientists who's like inspecting the pipes to make sure there's no leakages or anything finds a dead rat, and the dead rat isn't really dead because it's a zombie, and it attacks him and then bites him, and then he becomes a zombie, and then next thing you know, the whole lab is crawling with zombies. After that, you have this scene. It said it's outside the U.S. Embassy. It's not really said what country the embassy is at, though. But anyways, so there's a police standoff outside the embassy with a bunch of like terrorists holding everyone inside hostage. No one knows what faction this group of terrorists is affiliated with or anything. So they send in a bunch of commandos. They send in these 4 commando dudes inside the building to kind of mop up everybody. They go in Rainbow Six style. They, take out everyone, and then they have the leader of the sort of terrorist ring on the ground. He's dying. He says, he warns them that they're gonna kill you, and then they'll bring you back, or that they'll kill you and eat you, and then bring you back, or something like that. And then, next thing you know, the 4 army guys who, they aren't really important enough to, like, for me to differentiate them by name. I think the commander guy's name was, like, London, and he was kind of just, like, a generic gruff military guy. And then there was another one named Xantaro, he's kind of cuckoo, you find out later. The other two, I don't remember their names, they're not important, they're just kind of like there to, be guys holding guns and then to eventually get killed. So they're now out in New Guinea, they're awaiting orders, they're trying to radio back to base, they're not getting any orders, they're like, what are we doing out here, who knows. Then you get this truck where, well, it's like a van or whatever, and inside there's a couple and their young son. Their young son's been bit by one of the natives. He's not feeling well, and with them is also a young man with like kind of long hair and his like girlfriend. And the young man and the girlfriend, they wander off. The mom goes to look for help too, so that it's just the dad and the sick son in the car. And then the sick son becomes a zombie and he kills his dad, and the mom gets killed by a zombie priest. So that kind of just leaves the other young couple, and they get rescued by the 4 military guys. So from then on, basically what kind of happens is they team up, and they're like, well, we have to help these 2 civilians, stay safe, because there's all these like wackos out there. They don't really know what's going on, and the 2 civilians, they have their own secret mission because they're actually reporter. Well, the guy's a reporter, and I guess the girl's an anthropologist, and they're trying to figure out what's going on too. And there's intrigue kind of thing, but mostly what most of the rest of the movie devolves into is just kind of them wandering around the jungle and fighting zombies. And then there's kind of like, towards the end they end up finding the laboratory. And yeah, so I don't really need to go into a full scene by scene of this movie, because it's pretty straightforward, I guess. It's a zombie movie. It's really cheap and generic. You've seen one of these movies, you've seen them all pretty much. What is interesting and kind of differentiates this movie from others, though, is, well, it does make copious usage of stock footage. At one point, they go to speak with the local tribes people, and the reporter lady, she's lived with the tribes before, studying them for anthropology thing. So she, gets naked and puts on, like, face paint over her boobs, and, like, has just, like, a little tiny, like, grass, like, micro skirt thing. And she goes to visit the tribes. Most of the footage of the tribes is just, like, stock footage, though. And then, of course, when she enters the village, there's this really, scene of, like, the, like, village men coming out and, like, doing this, like, weird, like, ceremonial grope thing. Yeah, it's bad. But anyway, so, like, they kind of, like, there's a part where they meet up with the village, and the village gets attacked by zombies, so then they have to run away. And then there's a scene where they find a house, like a mansion, out in the jungle, and that gets filled up with zombies, and it's a zombie movie, like I said. What I mentioned earlier is that apparently this movie was maybe intended to be a lighter version of Dawn of the Dead. At least in Dawn of the Dead, people survived. This movie ends with everyone getting killed, but you don't really care because none of the characters are really likable in the first place. The only character that actually was, like, kind of remotely interesting was Xantaro, because he's kind of, like, he kind of goes off his rocker a little bit towards the end of the movie. He starts, like, there's a scene where one of the other soldiers is like, oh, you're scared of these things, aren't you? Talking about the zombies, and, like, Xantaro's like, no, look. And he, like, goes, like, gets, like, right up in the faces of the zombies. He's, like, sticking his arm out. He's like, come on, try to bite me. And, like, he's, like, ducking in and out of crowds of them. That was, like, pretty cool, I guess, because, he, like, kind of, like, highlights how ineffectual the zombies are. And really, the only reason he ends up dying later on is because he does one of those, like, things that only you see in, like, zombie movies that I hate, and I wish they wouldn't do these kind of things where it's, like, they need to have the character get killed off, so, like, the character just stands there and doesn't move while the zombies, like, grab him. It's, like, I get, like, that's a thing that, like, I get, like, you need to have characters die off to build up tension, but, although there are other ways of, like, going about that, it's just, like, it's so stupid that, like, a lot of times, like, because the standard slow zombies are so, like, non-threatening on an individual level, even sometimes in a group level, as long as you can, like, turn around and move. As long as you're not surrounded, you're basically safe from a zombie. So oftentimes you'll find in, like, bad horror movies, they'll have, like, a character just, like, stand completely still and let the zombies basically get them, even though they're, like, protesting and be like, no, don't bite me, kind of thing. It's like, I don't know, whatever. It's just bad writing. This movie has bad writing up and down. The dialogue's pretty garbage. None of the characters are interesting. The big twist towards the end of the movie is you find out this group called the Hope Center is, like, secretly trying to develop a zombie plague so that they can kill all the poor people in the world to end world starvation. Which, like, I guess, like, I don't know. You could argue that, like, back in the 70s and stuff, that was, like, a bit more of, like, a thing that seemed plausible for an organization to do, because back then you had environmentalist groups that were saying, like, you know, we need to fight overpopulation, and there was more of an emphasis on, like, hey, the third world is really overpopulated and they have a higher birth rate than the rest of the world. You know, maybe we should be, like, you know, offering, like, family planning and stuff in the third world kind of stuff. That's kind of become a little bit less savory an option for some people to talk about. So it's kind of mentioned less nowadays. But they still do have a higher birth rate in the third world than they do in the rest of the world. But the whole, like, overpopulation angle is now not as big a deal amongst the eco groups. Now they're more talking about global warming, which is apparently a totally different kettle of fish, I guess. Even though they're kind of related, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, it's a movie that tries to be, like, woke, but it's kind of just a dumb horror movie, which is a theme that you'll find in a lot of zombie movies. You find it's basically at the birth of the genre, where you'll find people talking about how Night of the Living Dead is, like, a metaphor for McCarthyism, and you also have people saying that, no, it's a metaphor for communism, and it was probably more likely a metaphor for McCarthyism, given that, like, Romero had kind of, like, vaguely leftist opinions, but I don't think he was a full-blown communist. Though he did have a kind of, like, just generic sort of, hey man, I hate rich people and consumerism. But, you know, it's pretty kind of just basic bitch stuff, I guess. So anyways, you have that, like, going back to the genesis of the genre. And these movies do also have a certain appeal to them. It's a very libertarian genre. Now, a lot of people tend to characterize libertarian as being a right-wing theory, but there's also left-wing libertarians. Basically, like, the whole idea of, like, what I mean by zombieism, like, zombie movies being libertarian, is that the whole idea is, like, it's basically, like, it's this often painted as, like, a negative, but deep down, it's, you really just want an excuse to go and, like, kill people and get away with it and rob stores. That's what a lot of, like, later zombie movies are about. It's just, like, people looting and killing dumb sheeple. Because that's what zombies are, essentially. They're dumb sheeple. And nobody wants to be a dumb sheeple. You want to be your unique individual snowflake. But then comes these fluoridated sheeple zombies, and they just want to make you like one of them, just a boring zombie that just follows the herd. But not you. You got your guns, and you like to rob stores, because that's what you do in the apocalypse. And that's why I think you have a lot of teenagers who end up becoming libertarians, and they want to smoke pot and not pay taxes. I think that's really what it boils down to. Maybe even a lot of them don't want to necessarily have to kill the zombie normies. They just want to not have to pay taxes and be able to, like, build a bunker. That's what I think it is. You don't want to work a 9 to 5. You just want to build a bunker and stock it full of looted supplies and not pay your taxes. That's the sort of end game zombie apocalypse scenario. What you had back in the 70s and 80s, you tend to have more pre-zombie apocalypse movies, in the sense that they were more about the build-up to the end of the world. It's that there's this virus or whatever, it's gonna come and it's gonna cause everyone to die out and become zombies. later on, that's when you, because early on you have Night of the Living Dead, and Return of the Living Dead, and Dawn of the Dead, all the kind of movies that are about the very beginning of things. Later on down the road, you have Day of the Dead, you have stuff like The Walking Dead, all that stuff's about after the world has ended. This is more of the early era, when movies were about before the zombie apocalypse. That was a big tirade about, that kind of got off topic, but really this is kind of just a forgettable movie. It tries to be woke, but then it has a bunch of natives, which are just kind of depicted as, these, kind of fondly gropey people who eat bugs, and there's a bunch of, stock footage. It's probably, I'm assuming, of different, probably, several different tribes all mixed together, because they all have, very different looking costumes. So it tries to be, do the whole, woke kind of thing, but it fails. And it's, as a zombie movie, it's okay, I guess. It suffers from that kind of Dawn of the Dead era zombie aesthetic, which was just basically, people with face paint on, for the most part. And then you got some, zombies that looked a little bit better. You got, some, cheesecloth painted red, and some, jelly-looking fake blood, but that's about it in terms of special effects. And these movies all just kind of have that vague anti-capitalist, anti-corporate attitude that was common at the time. Dawn of the Dead did it first and did it better. That's all you really need to say about this movie. It's if you like zombie movies, again, you'd probably just rewatch the classics. They're better than a lot of these sort of low-budget horror zombie movies that you got coming out afterwards. The one thing that is really good in this movie, though, is the Goblin soundtrack, which, it's Goblin, so of course it's great, but it doesn't redeem the movie. The movie's still a bad movie, and it is just an inferior version of Dawn of the Dead, so just go see Dawn of the Dead. They even have, a kind of similar aesthetic in that, the two military guys in Dawn of the Dead were wearing, blue jumpsuits. This even has, the commando guys are just, wearing, it looks like the same exact blue jumpsuit. So it's okay, well, you're not even gonna, try to mix it up a bit? I don't know. Maybe blue jumpsuits were just, kind of the go-to military outfit of the late 70s, early 80s. I don't think they were, though. Doesn't really make sense. But anyways, yeah, so Hell of the Living Dead is a dumb movie. I'd recommend it if you like old zombie movies, but I really would also recommend you try reading a book or something instead. I don't know, maybe write your own zombie movie. That'd be cool. Everyone's, I think, done that at one point or another. So if you haven't, try that. It probably won't be any worse than this. It wouldn't be too hard. And as for my predictions, so I was kind of right about a lot of the stuff. One thing I was wrong about is that it doesn't begin, like I said, it begins with a zombie outbreak at the lab, not in New York, but it does end with a zombie outbreak taking place in New York. Something about these Italian movies, they always have a scene that's, in New York or something. Don't know why. They just like New York. So that's about all. I strongly recommend you try that Celestial Seasoning Fireside Vanilla Spice. It's very nice tea. I don't drink my tea with any sugar. I think sugar is bad for you. It's interferes with my ketogenic diet. So yeah, don't have sugar. Sugar is bad for you. But tea's good for you, so drink tea. And don't watch zombie movies, because they're dumb. Or if you do, watch the good ones, because there are a few good ones. But don't watch the bad ones. That's about all. Thank you, and good night.